as you guys were communicating. So if you click on the More button, or if you click on the Chat button and open up this chat box to the right-hand side, you're able to click on Table Chat and you'll be able to start the conversation. Hey, Amy, nice to join. But you can turn off your camera and mic for now, and Laura as well. So I would love to thank you guys all for joining us today. We are going to be doing a 15-minute presentation on digital transformation with my colleague here, Mark Seaton.
Hi, Janet.
Hi. And then afterwards, we will end the discussion with a 45-minute virtual panel on with our esteemed colleagues from Mayo Clinic, Dr. Morris, Amy Alexander, as well as Laura Gilmore from EOS, and Keith Kraftmeyer from VisionAir 3D. So as you can see on the right-hand side, there's the chat. You can connect with anyone that's part of the event today. You can click on the Q&A where you can add questions and upvote the questions that you guys really want to pose. And then during the panel, we'll make sure that we get to the ones that are in the highest demand and forward the questions off to the relevant speakers if those answers are not responded to. Those questions are not responded to. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to Mark.
Welcome, everybody. And Janet's going to be putting up the slides. We only have about 10 slides today. The key for this is what has now become a series for Link 3D, where we pick a topic, in this case, digital transformation, and an industry, and explore the decisions that need to be made and all the different considerations as you evolve in digital transformation. You may have joined Link 3D this spring when we did our digital additive manufacturing marathon. We called it the DAM event, 26 hours of presentations. We're gonna do it again in April, and that's typically how long it takes to recover from a marathon for those of us who stayed up all night. We also have an ongoing series in Japan called JAM, hosted every month by our lead in APAC, Wataru Nishimura. So let's jump in today. Jen and I are going to talk, then we're going to have the industry experts from Mayo Clinic, EOS, and VisionAir to give their perspective on this digital transformation. And Jen and I are going to do our best to not make this a sales pitch for Link 3D. The key is moving the industry forward. So I'll give our really quick about Link 3D now. Link 3D, a lot of people think of it as a manufacturing execution system. It's software designed for additive. And we're thinking about it more as an operating system that allows you to do the end-to-end workflow needed, but also add in the best technologies and collect all the data needed to make predictive decisions in the future. That's Link 3D. But let's talk about the decisions that need to be made in medical and point of care. What are we talking about today, Janet?
Thanks, Mark. So we're talking about the additive pioneers that are really paving the way in the medical and point of care space. So as we can see on the left-hand side, these are use cases for point of care. And on the right-hand side are two major initiatives that can help enable higher quality care for patients. And so let's just take an example, anatomical modeling. You've got surgeons and physicians working with engineers to help define what are the requirements and specs for enabling the patient. And then where are we going to produce it? In-house? Are we going to outsource it? Are we going to have Lima Corporation build a facility in-house so we can produce on-site as well and bridge that expertise? But at the end of the day, in order to provide higher quality patient care, we need to be able to enable quality management and help mitigate the risks of potential failures that might take place throughout the production process. That end-to-end digital trail, we as an organization could help identify if we followed our fixed workflows, if there were any kind of gaps, and how we're going to proceed in terms of fixing it and ensuring that we are complying to our internal quality requirements, or even maybe FDA clearance requirements if we actually build medical devices in-house as well. And then the second initiative is, how can we make this economical for patients? How can we provide a sustainable business model for point of care additive manufacturing capabilities in-house? And to date, there's an initiative to help provide cases to the national registry data. And as you can see from 1 to 9, these are different headers in the documentation requirements. And it requires a lot of information from the ERM, but also a lot of information, as you can see, 3, 4, and 5 related to 3D printing, whether it be what kind of CAD systems you're using, what kind of printer technology, modality, material, support material usage, how much time it took. You know, all this information, if not tracked in an end-to-end system, could be a little bit arduous to manage and centralize. So looking at how you can connect all this information can definitely help with enabling these 2 key initiatives. On the medical device side, we also see different types of use cases for medical device manufacturing. Majority of the cases revolve around orthopedic implants, but there's a new trend towards scan-to-print and CAD-to-print technology. We're so excited to have Keith Grafmeyer from VisionAir later on talk about how they've actually spinned out from Cleveland Clinic to create VisionAir 3D, which helps use CAD tools to provide physicians at their point of care site to identify the requirements needed for the customers or the patients that can then be produced within their facilities. And so what we're looking at here is how can we provide scale for additive manufacturing initiatives? How can we provide that infrastructure that can help demonstrate quality compliance? So especially for a larger entity, in a more traditional setting, typically you might have many divisions at your large conglomerate using additive manufacturing. How can you provide in-house engineers access to your technology? How can we increase adoption? So by centralizing this capabilities, we could then have a way to centralize requests, streamline it across the AM supply chain, whether it be your internal facility, center of excellences, or even with your external supplier network. But the challenge here is if you have so many engineers, how do you make sure that data, when it's being processed, is tracked and traced and secure? And making sure that not only the CAD is secure, the STL file, but also the parameters are secure and the process that was defined is secure as well. So having an infrastructure system that can provide that level of governance is important. As well, if we're talking about developing devices, whether it's implants or other types of prosthetic solutions, and these parts are going to be out in the field, how can we ensure that we're producing with repeatability and traceability in mind? So if anything occurs, we're able to demonstrate to the FDA that everything is within compliance. So these are some of the initiatives that are that require typically digital infrastructure support to help scale these operations.
Jenna, before we move on to the decisions, the way we think about this are, and if you go back one slide, there are some really exciting use cases in both medical devices and point of care. There are a lot of different stakeholders whose mission is to ensure patient outcomes. And we need to position for the future in how this is going to be reimbursed and collecting all the data so it's repeatable. And to do all that, there are 3 high-level decisions that could be made. You need a system to capture the data, organize workflow, and ensure repeatability. You could adapt what you have today in ERM. You could build a custom solution, or we could build a custom solution, or you could adopt an additive operating system. And the way we think about these decisions is essentially bang for the buck. What will give us the highest strategic value at the lowest level of effort or risk? Adapting an existing system, you'll see you can't capture the full strategic value, where the other 2 decisions you can. And then when you move to what does it cost to do in effort and complexity, adapting and building high effort in doing it the first time and maintaining and keeping it up to standard as the industry evolves very, very rapidly. There's a little bit of delay with Remo. So, and you may wonder, why do we come to these conclusions? Well, we created this matrix here. It's essentially gain effort matrix. In the x-axis, it's strategic value, high to low. And then in the y-axis, it's inverted, implementation and maintenance from complex to simple. Ideally, you want to be in the top right corner. That would be high strategic value, low level of effort. And here we show each piece of functionality for adapting an existing system. And let's take machine connectivity, for example. That's up at the top left. High strategic value, but fairly complex to do. That's because it's not just is your 3D printing machine or additive manufacturing machine on or off, or the status, but how are we collecting data across the whole build of a part or model to ensure it can be done exactly the same way and ensure demonstrable, repeatable compliance? Very difficult to do. Then if you switch to adopting an additive operating system, these functions move up to the top right. You have somebody who is looking at machines and making relationships with every machine maker. For example, EOS is on the call or on the webinar today, and Laura can give her perspective on this. It makes it much more simple for the manufacturer to execute. One of the surprises, though, that a lot of people don't think about is the need for data analytics. Whenever we partner with someone, that is the thing that they come to us afterwards and say, wow, that was the biggest return we got, was collecting the data in a unified data layer that also integrates with my other systems. So I don't need to track down spreadsheets or ask people what had happened before. It's all in one system connected to my data lake. And Janet, we were talking about today, but as we move towards the future, we've created this security matrix. You start in the reactive stage. I've added some machines. I'm thinking about additive, and I've created some initial processes. Where are we today, Janet?
Definitely. So a lot of medical device manufacturers often start with using existing systems today, like SharePoint, Microsoft systems, to help centralize requests from their engineers. And then we also see medical point-of-care organizations looking at how they can configure their ERM systems to collect the information and requests, and then using, on both sides, Excel spreadsheets to manage these operations. But the challenge is, once you hit a certain point, you have a high volume of activities, you require to demonstrate quality compliance and are trying to find better ways to trace this information, you might hit what we call the brick wall, because no matter the number of people you hire or number of machines you can have, you might be limited to that. So having a digital infrastructure that can help identify bottlenecks, enable traceability, can help provide organizations an infrastructure for automation to set them up for success in the future with predictive models as well.
A lot of people ask us, when can I invest in an operating system? How do I know? And it's when you start, the real frank way to say it, when you start feeling pain or you want to plan for the future. Like two of the best reasons for it. I know where I'm going and I want to start in the right place, or I can't keep up with existing volume, and there's becoming a very high risk that something's going to go wrong. So thinking about the future is why a lot of people, how we've designed the Link 3D operating system, for example. And Link 3D in this, or an operating system for additive in this diagram, it's hard not to make it a sales pitch, is represented by the blue oval in the middle and the blue box at the top. That's your end-to-end additive workflow, all the functions you need. But more importantly is the architecture that allows you to add on the best-in-class third-party applications, whether it be build preparation, CAD, any of the, or your own data lake. Because this industry is evolving so rapidly, you want to have seamless access to be able to bring the best technology into your environment. And then of equal importance is data. Janet, if you don't mind going back to that slide. At the bottom of the screen, I mentioned data from machines, but also quality systems and post-processing. How can we collect it, translate it through a common gateway, and make predictive decisions on it? And then Janet, there you go.
Oh, and when you figure out what are the pieces you need to help capture the day-to-day data trail, then you have to figure out how do all these pieces play together. And so especially for medical device manufacturers, oftentimes you have to integrate additive manufacturing into your supply chain. And how do you do that? Typically, you will want to integrate it with an ERP system, so you could enable procurement to send requests into your infrastructure. But you also want to be able to provide flexibility for your product innovation teams to support all the engineers. So creating that portal that can help facilitate that, and then being able to streamline these varying requests to the right facilities that can bring that part to market on time at the right quality output. And similarly for point of care, you've got your ERM system where it centralizes all of the data that is necessary for patient care. But at the end of the day, as we know, we are an industry that wants to provide better care for our community members. How can we do that successfully as well? So going back to enabling a quality management environment where we can collect customer requirements, being able to facilitate that information across the internal facilities or supplier network, and having all the data tracked from production, post-processing, QC, and delivery is vital for building a sustainable business model.
And what you're seeing on the screen, it may look complex. And Janet can send you the slides afterwards. You'll see her email address on the next slide. What you're seeing is an example implementation. Gray being your existing infrastructure, technology infrastructure, blue being the additive operating system. And you may gather on the far left-hand side, the customer, that could be a physician, could be an engineer, internal to your organization or external. And the facilities could be internal or external as well, allowing you to scale without the capital investment or enable real-time disaster recovery. What the keys for this are making sure that you can enable operational excellence and optimal patient outcomes, and then position yourself for the future. Yeah. So that's it for me and Janet. I mean, the stars of the show are our partners from Mayo, EOS, and VisionAir. So let's bring them up on stage. If you'd like those slides, please email Janet at link3d.co. She'd be happy to send them to you and help you on your digital transformation journey.
Thank you very much, Mark. So I will now call on our wonderful speakers, Amy, Keith, Laura, Dr. Morris. If you're able to turn on your camera and mic, that would be great. Hello, Keith. How are you? How are you? All right. Full house here. Mark, feel free to turn off your mic and we're ready to go. Awesome. So we're really excited to have you guys here today because this is a topic that's not often talked about, which is digital transformation for medical device and point of care. Before we get started, maybe we should do like a round of quick introductions. Amy, do you want to start? Oh, you're muted, by the way. Yeah.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
My name is Amy Alexander. I'm a senior engineer here in the Department of Radiology at Mayo Clinic. I support Dr. Morris as medical director of the anatomic modeling lab. We are a clinical service, so we receive orders every day from surgeons around the hospital, and we create anatomic models and anatomic guides in-house. We have 36 printers on the 6th floor of the hospital here at St. Mary's. The surgeons operate 5 floors below us and come up pretty much anytime they're ready to do surgical planning and model preparation.
Keith? Oh.
Hi, my name's Keith Grafmeyer. So I am the Director of Product Development at VisionAir Solutions. And we make patient-specific airway stents. So we make the software that streamlines the transfer of a CT scan. We automatically segment that airway and then allow the physician to actually design from the ground up a patient-specific airway stent using their own dimensions that they want. And then we take that output from what they've created, and we manufacture using 3D printing an airway stent for the patient, and then deliver it to the hospital.
Laura, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, happy to, Janet, thanks. My name is Laura Gilmore. I am the Global Medical Business Development Manager at EOS. EOS is one of the leading providers of industrial 3D printing solutions with machines, materials, service, and group called Additive Minds that does some co-creation with our customers. I've been with EOS for about 5 years now, always working with medical customers around the world. And prior to that, I've worked at a few medical device manufacturers as well as the FDA as one of the founding members of the additive manufacturing working group there. So thank you, Link3D, for having me.
Thank you. And Dr. Morris.
Yeah, my name is Dr. Morris. I'm an interventional neuroradiologist at Mayo Clinic. I lead our 3D printing group. We've been doing it here for about 16 years and have grown from a few printers to as many as what Amy said. And we have about 8,000 square feet of manufacturing space in the hospital directly above the OR. So we do point of care manufacturing of anything from anatomic models to custom guides to custom training devices. And then we have titanium printers going in the Department of Engineering. Started last year, but being qualified for a 13485 FDA inspected facility 2021. So the titanium is already here, but it's working through its paces.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, everybody. So just as a quick reminder for the audience, if you do have questions, because we have such a dynamic panel, feel free to pose it in the Q&A box and upvote your favorite questions. But before we get started, we really want to understand, how did you start your digital transformation journey, or what are your considerations for it? And I know, Dr. Morris, you're a big proponent of this. Do you want to start first?
Sure. So we started small, like most point of care manufacturing centers in the US. We're really around the world with local champions, myself and Dr. Matsumoto, and clinical cases where we thought 3D printing could help. Starting with really complex stuff and then moving to more, I guess, still complex, but easier. And, like you stated in your presentation, there's a point where you outgrow your kind of digital needs. So right now, we manufacture 3,000 or so objects a year for probably 2,000 or so for patients. And to give you a scope, we do 75,000 surgeries a year at Mayo Clinic just in Rochester. So we don't even touch 1% of that. And even when you get to these levels, we quickly, one of the things we quickly needed was a way to integrate it into the healthcare environment. So in the early years, you could just send us an email, page us, but when we have physicians coming from every surgical subspecialty, we needed a way to incorporate it into the standard workflow of healthcare, which meant initially we were working through Epic. So Epic or Cerner are the two leading EMRs in the country, and we needed to have ways that physicians and surgeons could just order this like they ordered a CBC or something else, or a consultation. And then all the workflow for point of care manufacturing had to be custom made in that EMR, which is extremely limited because it's not made to be a manufacturing software. It has several limitations when it comes to that. So that's when we reached out to Link3D as we started evaluating vendors to see who could be our manufacturing software that could not only do what you do really well in additive, but it has to incorporate in a HIPAA compliant cloud-based environment with several unique qualifications of healthcare. So I think if you're just starting out in this and you have, say, a Form Labs and a Materialize license, then you probably don't need this, but at least you should be thinking about it because every center that we've helped develop grows rapidly. It's something that you should be thinking of upfront. And until now, really, there's no turnkey solutions. And we've talked about this offline, the group that's on the table, that really turnkey solutions for point of care manufacturing or even medical device manufacturing doesn't exist. It doesn't exist from a software perspective. It doesn't exist from post-processing. The entire solution doesn't exist. So this is one, I think, critical part of the industry will help solve some of those solutions.
Yeah. And it's very interesting because it's not only just point of care or also medical device manufacturer, but in general, the industry as a whole for additive needs solutions to help enable additive or advanced manufacturing worldwide. And like you mentioned, using Epic might be a great starter, but long-term, not a manufacturing system. Amy, you mentioned the importance of quality management system and how that can enable patient care. Is there anything you'd like to add to that from what Dr. Morris just talked about as well?
Sure, I can add that the entire process from image acquisition, maintaining calibration of image acquisition equipment, CT, MR, ultrasound scanners, through the segmentation, through the CAD, through the printing, post-processing, and inspection needs to be basically gone through with a fine-tooth comb to identify the risks associated with each individual step. And where we live in the Department of Radiology, of course, the imaging is the most important input to the process. And without the ACR, American College of Radiology regulation, that allows our scanners to be maintained by medical physicists, we couldn't rely on that imaging. And so that's just the first of many risk mitigation factors that are in place for point of care manufacturing, as well as patient-specific anatomical models and guides that are produced by medical device companies. So from imaging acquisition, we go through the segmentation process, and we have to train our segmenters on what they're looking at. The segmentation contours, of course, must match or express the patient-specific anatomy, and then so on and so forth. The printers themselves have to be validated. The process through which files are loaded and come out needs to be validated. The parts have to be verified, and the methods by which you do that can be broad. You can use visual inspection, fiducial measurement, metrology, but essentially the material properties that you get out of your printer also need to be tested and confirmed, and then the process by which you manufacture these things should be set in stone or through an SOP where people are trained and credentialed on how to do this. So there are, the more you think about it, the more you uncover in terms of risk and where things could go wrong. So doing this all in a short time frame in response to clinical need is quite a complex undertaking.
Mayo Clinic for paving the way there and also being very open with your lessons learned. Speaking of lessons learned, Keith, you actually came from the point of care industry and have spinned off technologies that are now commercialized, like VisionAir. How was the process of, introducing digital infrastructure that could help enable your FDA clearance that took place recently?
Yeah. So originally, the product that we're now producing under an FDA clearance was, of course, just an idea from a physician in the Cleveland Clinic. And originally, they were doing points of care manufacturing. And, Amy and Dr. Morris have discussed the issues with scaling and repeatability and risk control. And it actually got to a point where the Cleveland Clinic didn't entirely want to take on liability. There's liability involved with making sure that the quality of your products, especially as you're scaling, are meeting certain requirements. And those requirements are a little bit gray when it comes to point of care manufacturing. You can use FDA guidelines and standards as guides. It's a little bit more cut and dry when you're a medical device manufacturer because you're told exactly what you need to follow from the FDA. So ultimately, they decided to form a company around this, and we were doing orthopedic 3D printing and development at the time and took this on. But in terms of actually getting to a point of being able to scale this and streamline it as a product, it started out as using a CAD program, messaging back and forth with the physician, designing it with them over a virtual meeting. And eventually, of course, we made the decision to create a custom software product around this. And so we've kind of created the streamlined solution from CT scan all the way through design by the physician, including segmentation, and have actually been building out a order management side of this. Dr. Morris mentioned using ERPs in manufacturing at Mayo Clinic. And it's a very interesting idea, being able to actually have in a patient's chart the device that was designed. Also gives patients a peace of mind. We frequently get requests to actually give stents as examples to the patients, and they find it very interesting that they're receiving patient-specific devices. But it's been a journey. You originally piecemeal together softwares, and then you have to make a decision on acquiring, like you guys mentioned, solution or building.
Very interesting. Thanks for sharing the journey to bring these medical device solutions from the hospital setting. I've met quite a few point-of-care organizations pursuing that path, so we thank you for that. And speaking of new technology development and introduction, Laura, you've seen a lot of organizations adopt new technologies from point-of-care to hospitals, point-of-care also going into orthopedic implant production as well, and also spinning out medical devices. What are some of the considerations that can enable them on the digital side?
Sure. I think historically a lot of organizations went through the same journey that Keith described, so creating something that's very custom based. And so folks that have entered the market a little bit later on have a lot more tools available to them in terms of digital workflow. And one of the things that we hear quite a lot from organizations is how many pieces of software you need to use to go from your CT or MRI that Amy was talking about to the part that's being printed. And so having a way to show what that workflow looks like, having a way to make sure that SOPs are being followed at each step of the process, that's something that I think folks can really consider in their digital transformation to use advanced technologies for manufacturing.
Dr. Morris, you also mentioned last time when we talked during the kickoff call that medical device manufacturing in point of care is no different than medical device manufacturing offsite. Is that?
They have nuances. Point of care manufacturing has a lot of nuances that medical device manufacturing doesn't have, and vice versa. So if you're 3D printing a custom device like Keith's group, or you're 3D printing acetabular bone implant interface like Stryker, I mean, those two in and of themselves have nuances that are different from each other with different requirements. And point of care, we have a different regulatory infrastructure than the med device world for anatomic models and guides and what's considered lower risk, at least now from the FDA. And we're essentially making a unique device every single time. Outside of some of the COVID responses, everything we make is a unique product. So creating quality control standards and creating ways to assure that every step of the process, including the printer's functionality, is something different than if you're just trying to say, do these 100, medical devices all pass the test, right? So there's uniqueness to, I think, each group, but they all have a lot of overlapping similarities, particularly when it comes to, like I said, like turnkey manufacturing solutions. If you look at the number of FDA approved turnkey solutions, there's like one. It's for radiation boluses for anterior face that a hospital system could go purchase on the market and start doing it with a turnkey solution. That's it. I mean, even if you're a medical device manufacturer, so if you don't have additive manufacturing knowledge and you want to, start adding additive to your armamentarium, well, there's a really steep learning curve. Yeah. And a lot of people you have to hire internally, and a lot of unknowns that, quite frankly, you have to learn by doing, because the whole story is not laid out in front of you, because each additive company doesn't sell all the pieces to the puzzle. I mean, even software for the build volume itself, you can buy industrial printer and they ask you to buy a third-party software to do the slicing on their printer, because that's not where their company focused their efforts on, right? I mean, there's stuff that that just can't exist in the future for this industry to move forward, because the digital control of all the information and where you put all this is one part of it, but there's a lot of bottlenecks and there's a lot of inefficiencies and there's a lot of unknowns in the industry, and every site just can't have to recreate the wheel. Like you showed that graph where it was like simple and highest return on investment, and you'd say, well, does additive in medical live there at all? Because I can tell you everybody on this call has done a lion's share of effort and a lot of heart, soul, passion to make this happen, because it wouldn't happen on its own, because it's not simple, and the return on investment comes from pioneers like Laura and Keith and Amy and Andy Christensen and Frank Rickey and Bill. We have all these people that are kind of pushing this industry forward to live up to its potential, like good parents would. But hopefully we'll get to the point where we are in that box. But there are a lot of overlapping circles up in that upper right-hand corner.
There are.
If you talk to the people who actually do this in medical, none of us would be up there.
So it's really interesting. You talk about turnkey solutions. And one question that got voted up, which is really related to this area, is, as you know, point of care printing parts has many moving parts, including materials management, CAPA, credentialing, scheduling, and post-processing, among others. As part of digital transformation of point of care printing, do you guys have recommendations on how to consolidate and manage all these processes? I was wondering if Dr. Morris can share, and then Amy can help finish that.
Well, I think you have to have a desire to do so, which I think you should, because if you have a medical error based on something that you've created, like a mirror image happens, or you're sending a guide to the OR that doesn't match the patient's anatomy or slides too far up or down the bone, and a surgeon cuts through a tumor or something, or even do a wrong-sided procedure for a wrong-sided anatomy. I mean, it's a massive ordeal, and it would harm a patient potentially. So I think you definitely should want to enter into this space. And that's just not true for point of care. We get designs from industry. I can tell you where the design is 100% wrong from major medical manufacturers who are about to cut through a tumor which would destine that person to have 100% chance of metastasis. So it's just not us. And defining who those people are and defining who's going to do what and all the quality standards you have, I think when we talk about it, and when me and Amy talk about it at national meetings, at least on the medical side, and at SME and ASME on the manufacturing side, I mean, there's a lot that's harped on for quality, because we're so adamant that the finished product has to be what we send into it. And what we send into it has to be accurate representations of patient-specific devices and goods. So I think having the idea that I have to think about this, and right now, there's not a lot of places you can go to learn about it. I mean, you can go to conferences. I think Amy compiled a whole list on the RSNA 3D SIG, so she could talk about that, but there's not a lot of places where you say, I want to learn medical 3D printing, and I want to learn quality management systems for that. I mean, it's such a unique industry filled with so many different variables. And I know this because we're hiring 2 engineers right now and finding people that have additive manufacturing knowledge, medical knowledge, anatomic knowledge, imaging knowledge, or any of even 2 of the 3 is challenging. So I think just starting at the point where you have to say, I should think about quality up front. And when I think about quality, I'm going to need a quality management system. And what does that look like? And who provides that, and how am I going to design it? And Amy could probably talk more eloquently about how to design it.
Sure. So when you're thinking about quality, you have to start with your inputs, understand the manipulation of the data as it goes through the life cycle of model and guide development, and then verification of your outputs. And every single step, as I've noted, is extremely important and can produce failure if not properly managed and documented and with proper oversight from those who are experts in things like, for example, all of our segmentation is reviewed and approved specifically of cancerous tumors, et cetera, by our radiology team. Our radiologists are the ones who know the imaging. You cannot get that expertise from an engineer who is not a radiologist. It's just not possible. So implementing those stopgaps that say, has a radiologist reviewed, edited, and approved this tumor segmentation? Can we move forward with our virtual planning? Is crucial. What we started with in terms of quality management was out of necessity. Of course, it's important that we do not create a model and send a model for patient A to the OR with patient B. And so how do you confirm that that's not going to happen? How do you mitigate that risk? It's about labeling requirements, which the FDA is very clear on for medical device management, but they're not very clear on for point of care. So it's a question of do you relate those regulations and use them at the point of care, or do you make up what you think is safe enough? Is it a dual or triple authentication process that this model goes with this patient, et cetera? So you start with spreadsheets, you start with emails asking, hey, Dr. Morris, can you look at this tumor? But what we've evolved to is, I'll use the buzz term digital transformation, where we took our duct tape fix of a quality management system, and we are now inputting all of those documents and tracking training, credentialing our staff, tracking the life cycle of every anatomic modeling guide into a manufacturing execution system. We did select Link 3D for that system, which is how we got connected with Janet Carr and why we're here today. So yeah, it had to start somewhere, and because there wasn't a turnkey solution to just purchase and put in the hospital, we kind of developed it. We created an anatomic modeling order in Epic. We created a status report with every phase of the project lifecycle, from awaiting imaging to segmentation to CAD to review by radiologists to 3D printing, post-processing, any secondary processing, ready to deliver. So it's sitting in our glass cabinet waiting for pickup, delivered. And then of course, with the new implementation of the category 3 CPT codes, we started doing a dictation on every modeling guide that's done for every patient, which then goes into the coding and billing process. So Epic has been where we've stored this information for the last 2+ years, and we're transferring a lot of the manufacturing data into Link 3D.
Oh, thank you. I didn't pay them to talk about this, but thank you so much, Dr. Morris and Amy, for highlighting your experience and why you decided to choose this path. One area that I would love to touch on in this area is the medical device side, because even at Mayo Clinic or Warner Robins and other types of organizations are looking at supporting that today. Keith, you've also ventured into this area. We have a question that has been upvoted to the top. When thinking about ISO 13485 certification, is there a system most medical manufacturers are using to enable part or program certification? And I was curious what that also looks like on the point of care side. But Keith and Laura, can you guys start with that? Keith being the first one.
Yes, so at our company, we use a electronic system for pre-market certification called Greenlight Guru. There's multiple softwares that deal with requirements management, things like that. Another one is Master Control. And these are just electronic systems where you can store all of your quality documentation, your requirements, things like that. And then you have systems like Link 3D that are more on the manufacturing side, making sure that you're going from order to part and keeping that quality system in check. Today, our company does that via paper and logs the old-fashioned way, but scaling that is going to be difficult. And I think it was Dr. Morris mentioned there really is no end-to-end operating system software available that will give you all of the necessary, checks and verifications, all the way from, input development all the way through the part coming out the other side. And one thing to keep in mind is, even though we have an electronic system, those systems need to be configured according to your company or your hospital. And there's a lot of work to be done there. And it's even more work since we're working with 3D printing, because every single part is different that comes off. So trying to put a quality system box around the way that you do development, but then also trying to put a box around the way that you do manufacturing, all while acknowledging the fact that every single part is different. It can be a challenge, even with a software, even if you had an end-to-end software.
Laura, you're at the beginning or at the scaling phase when organizations want to adopt technology. What are some recommendations that you often provide, coming from working at the FDA and all the other medical device manufacturers you've supported in the past?
Sure. So one of the things that, I often see is an organization will want to come into using 3D printing for a specific product. And so maybe it's one piece of that product line, or one area of instrumentation that they're using, if it's a patient-specific instrument. And they think about their quality system just for that one part or one instrument. And what I try to recommend and ask folks to think about is how to implement what's the next thing that you're going to be doing. How are you going to be using this technology in the future? And to really think in a bigger picture, because oftentimes we see folks create their quality system around one thing, which would be extremely detrimental in a point of care situation when every part is different. And so if you have to look at something more broadly than just that first part and what those requirements may be. So that's generally what I like to help organizations think through. And that sometimes goes all the way to the highest levels of that organization, whether it's a surgical team and the highest level of that as the chair, or if it's a CEO of an organization. So sometimes it really has to come from the top to think about the broad scope, not just the engineering side, but also the manufacturing side of that process. And yes, I agree with Keith, there are many, many different types of software that are used throughout that, whether you're talking about a design history file or the systems that you're using to track your quality system in manufacturing. So,
to add on to what Laura was saying, one big thing that we haven't talked about is data for both input development and then also for the verification side of things. We were fortunate that we came out of a hospital, so we had a lot of data. When I say data, I mean CT scans. So when you're developing processes or algorithms to, say, segment an airway, in our case, you need to be able to view the big picture and see all the different fringe cases of pathology and anatomy that you're going to see. And that can be a very big challenge if you're in a medical device manufacturing company, to get all of that data and evaluate the different cases that you're going to see and have to put through your patchwork system that you've created via your quality system.
That's right. Anything else you'd like to add, Amy or Dr. Morris? Oh, you're muted. Yeah.
Muted, Dr. Morris.
Yeah, there it goes. I think Keith said that part really well. I mean, there's going to be future data that we currently aren't even importing, right? The ability to have massive amounts of segmented data leads to AI, machine learned segmentation algorithms, which are then also going to have to be validated, proven, repeatable from multiple different scanners across multiple different healthcare institutions, right? So there's input data that we're starting to create and collect that hasn't even been thought of. So as Laura stated, you really have to think broad, not just across your whole operation about what printing infrastructure you have, but also across your data elements, and think about what you're doing today is not going to be what you're doing in 5 to 10 years, particularly when it comes to these kind of machine learned AI segmentation, CAD files. I mean, then we might be up in the upper left-hand corner where we get a CT scan, it segments itself, the guide builds itself based on anatomic parameters. It goes to a printer that knows how to auto-correct itself when the build is failing. I mean, there's things that the future will hold for us that you have to think about in your system and leave room for, because some of that stuff's coming faster than others. Having, if you are a medical device manufacturer, I think having good relationship with a clinical partner, as Keith said, they were kind of lucky to start in the clinical space. But a lot of the great work we've seen is when people have strong clinical partnerships that can help ask the right questions, but also test some of the solutions. So you're not operating in a vacuum, thinking that you know what I might want, and you don't even understand the cultural barriers that would prevent your so-called awesome 3D printed next greatest thing from even entering the supply chain of a hospital. So I would also say that don't operate in a vacuum. Both from our side, we learn a lot from the device industry, but from the device industry side too, to have strong clinical partners when you're going into these realms.
But I can piggyback off of what Dr. Morris just said. I think that's really important also, the clinical device manufacturer relationship. I think one of the reasons orthopedics has been successful using additive technologies is because that's the way those organizations work. They have, design surgeons that work with them to create designs based on need. So I think something like a cardiovascular group may not do that. For example, when I worked at Medtronic, they have the spine team as well as, historically cardiovascular solutions, and the cardiovascular team didn't work as closely with their clinical counterparts as the spinal group did. So I think it's really interesting where Keith came from and their story, because they were homegrown in a hospital organization and were successful that way. So I really do believe Dr. Morris is spot on with having that close clinical engineering relationship, as Amy does every day in her job, right? So, yeah.
Speaking of, working with a lot of different folks and getting buy-in, what are some of the change management challenges you guys face to get additive adopted, or to use that to develop new medical devices versus another technology, and also helping educate more folks into learning what's possible and then giving it a try? Laura, since you spoke last, do you want to chat about that first?
Sure. So one of the things that I think when adopting additive technologies as an organization in general, that historically has been a barrier, has been really, you don't know what you don't know. And probably Dr. Morris and Amy's journey has really shown that. And so, partnering with a group that has folks who are experts, and I guess for an example, the way EOS approaches that is that, we have our engineering consultants or co-creators called Additive Minds. We work with the organizations, knowing and understanding that they're the experts in what they do, and EOS is there to help transfer expertise into additive manufacturing expertise into the minds of the folks you're working with. And so I think that's really important to have a good partner, whatever that technology might be, that understands it in and out and has done it before with other organizations that are trying to do the same thing you're doing. And that's something that I think, as one of the early additive technology companies, EOS has done really well. And my predecessors, Martin Bulmer, some of you may know him, who have worked in this space for a very long time and did a great job laying the foundation for that. So
that's amazing. And Amy, since you're at the forefront of developing all these solutions with Dr. Morris, do you feel the same way, or has there been a different experience for you?
Well, first, I wouldn't say that I'm at the forefront of the development. I think there are many people that came before myself. Dr. Morris has been doing 3D printing since 2001 at the NIH. Dr. Pete Leocoris at Walter Reed, early adopter. I mean, there are many people that I could name.
Well, you're at the forefront now.
Well, I mean, I think it's all about leveraging your resources. And I mean, I've sat with headphones on and listened to 21 CFR 820 to better understand what the regulation is. I know Keith is like, you're insane. And that's true. That's why I'm here. But, there's no right, perfect answer. And the FDA is not going to say, this is how we want you to do it. But in terms of change management, you really have to start small. Dr. Morris says this a lot. You start with one project. You start with one type of model or one type of guide. And once you've honed your process based on that application, then you can start to expand. Same thing goes with 3D printers. You don't just start off with a fleet of, 5 different printing technologies and 36 different printers. You start with one and you see what you can do with it. And then we've changed based on the clinical need. When the surgeons come to us and say, I'd really like this in photorealistic color, then we look at what options are on the market for photorealistic color. What different material properties do they need for better biomimicry, for surgical rehearsal, task training, medical simulation, etc. We respond with our purchasing decisions based on what they need. And that does require a lot of education. Like Janet said, you can't expect an engineer, a surgeon, and a radiologist to meet for the first time and speak the exact same language. So there's barriers there in transferring of the language and the nomenclature that we use. They use clinical verbiage that a lot of mechanical engineers may come into the space not understanding. So the education of those who are entering this space and into this congruence of surgery, radiology, and engineering is really important, which is why we advocate for that. And I do try to put forward links on courses and certifications and even undergraduate and graduate programs that focus on additive manufacturing and more specifically the medical side of things.
Morris, anything you'd like to add to that? Because I remember this was a near and dear topic to your heart.
We're talking about obstruction, things that are in the way, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think desire is a big part of it. If you're a point of care manufacturer, like we've kind of spoken around the world at places, and if you have people locally that have a desire to help patients using point of care manufacturing with models and guides, usually it expands, but there's a lot of bottlenecks, right? I mean, there's a lot of personnel that are needed to do it. There's a lot of kind of things you have to learn on the fly, like Laura and Amy had stated. There are people around to help you, but it's still, I don't need any help when I go downstairs and run a CT scanner. I don't need any help when in fact, if you brought a aneurysm device to our OR and there was something where I need a little help to use it, I guarantee that product would never step in our OR. Like people don't come to medicine in general when we're delivering care with things that need a huge push, right? So you really have to want to help patients with this technology to start. And then if that's your underlying desire, then you're willing to put up with bottlenecks in segmentation, bottlenecks in bad imaging. I mean, some imaging companies, they reject 25% of studies that are brought to them because they have bad input protocols. I mean, that's a huge loss if 25% of your images have to be rejected, right, for a medical device. So, I think if you have a strong desire to help patients, you'll come over all these bottlenecks and you'll overcome all these hurdles that might be standing in your way of delivering it. I mean, finances was a big one until we have category 3 codes now, but we can reimburse, we can do billing for 3D printing, but there's a huge burden in medicine that most hospitals don't overcome. So if Keith can make the greatest stent in the world, but if there's not a way for every hospital to get paid for it, it doesn't get widespread broad adoption. You get a bunch of great stories about how high-end places like UPenn and Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic are using it, but it's not being used every place it could be used. So reimbursement is a huge hurdle. We're trying to cross it. We have category 3 codes, but even when we get to category 1 codes, I mean, I do procedures all the time that have category 1 codes that some insurance company just denies, and you have to go through the process of getting it paid for. So when you're talking about, we have a multi-million-dollar investment at point of care manufacturing, if you count staff, space, equipment, industrial manufacturing capabilities, and we're not pumping out med devices. We have 70 engineers downtown that make a lot of medical devices that end up on the market. We're a clinical service with a massive investment to do one thing: help patients. And if that's your goal, then a lot of these things can be overcome. And quite frankly, there's a lot of people in the industry that are more than willing to help you. I mean, we're willing to help. Amy's willing to help. The SME, the ASME, people like Laura, Keith. I mean, people at AMUG, people at the RSNA 3D SIG. It's a tight-knit community of people who really want to see this flourish and really want to see it be successful. I think if we do it for the right reason, all those things are able to be overcome and should be overcome, because if Keith's company doesn't have a strong desire to improve pediatric airway care, and there's a need in the market for pediatric devices, that device never comes to the market. End of story. If Materialize didn't take a need in external tracheobronchial stents and spend all the money to try and bring a 510K clear product to market, that never comes to us in medicine. I know this because we work with a lot of our pediatric surgeons, and people don't make things for them because their return on investment in industry is not great enough. Mm-hmm. That's what's different about point of care manufacturing. I think our return on investment is patient care. You, your loved one, your family members getting better care. But that's not Biomed Zimmer. They have to have a return on investment that makes money. So I mean, billing is a huge part of that.
Very true. Thank you so much, Dr. Morris, for that. And this will be our last response. Keith, anything you'd like to add to that? Dr. Morris just gave a very nice anecdote as to what it will take for us to really provide more innovation. But you're on the other side. How do you get people to finally adopt something that you've innovatively created? How are other folks like yourselves going to be able to, challenge the status quo?
So I'll start with the answer to that, and that is data, clinical data. At the end of the day, all of the physicians want to see that what you're creating works, and if you can get that data, that opens the door. But then once that door is open, there's some challenges that we continue to face, and billing, of course, is one of those. In orthopedics, there are billing codes for preoperative planning and things like that. But in smaller markets, such as interventional pulmonology, where we're at, it can be more of a challenge to get those billing codes created. But the other big thing for me that stood out to try to improve adoption is changing habits of physicians. Physicians, you're not going to find anyone in the world that's more trained at doing one small, task. And if what you're creating changes their workflow in any way, whether that be waiting for the device to be delivered, how they actually implant that device in our case, it's going to be tougher to drive adoption. And that also comes in the material side. One of our competitors, actually at Duke University, they're 3D printing in a different material than what is normally used in airway stents. And it's difficult to convince physicians to move away from trusted materials that have been used and shown to work for many, many years. And then the final thing I'd say that's a challenge is imaging modality. So if you create a product that utilizes CT scan to create the guide or anatomy, but the standard of care in that field is say X-ray, you're really going to have a tough time, because not only do they have to pay for your device, but they now have to pay for that CT scan, which is not standard of care.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Keith. That pretty much sums up our panel for today. I know there's a lot of questions that folks want to ask, so I will definitely share that with all of our panelists if they're able to respond to them and reach out to you directly. But I think as a quick summary, you know, in order to enable higher quality patient care, Dr. Morris mentioned, you know, we need to have the heart to put the effort, the blood, sweat, and tears to make sure that we could really push the technology, spend the time working with the different partners so that we can hopefully one day create that turnkey solution so anyone can just easily adopt it. We're a bit far away from that as an industry, but I think together as we continue collaboration across all sectors, hopefully we'll get there one step at a time closer to that. So thank you very much, Dr. Morris, Amy, Laura, and Keith for joining our webinar panel. We will now go back to the virtual floor. So feel free to stay for another 15 minutes or so to answer any questions that folks might have directly for you. If you have a question, feel free to double click a table and then turn on your camera and mic to start talking. We have extended the meeting room for another 30 minutes, as you've seen, but the event does officially close at 1:30. So don't feel like you have to stay if you need to go. Thank you very much, and see you on the virtual floor.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you.
Yeah.